Hi friends, it's time for my September 2023 reading wrap-up where I'm going to talk about all the books that I read in September of this year. I also had a pretty decent reading month in September, so I'm excited to get to the books. There's going to be quite a few of them, and I will try and link whatever vlogs I talked about them in below for more thoughts on any of these books. So we're going to start with a short story that I read to kick off the month, and that is Uncharted Dreams, which is by Pascal Lascelles. This is sort of a prequel, very short story that you can read on simonteen.com for free. It is about Romy, and she's a dreamer, and she's determined to follow after this dream that continues to elude her. This story is very short. There's really not much plot to it, so I can't really rate it properly, but I will say it gives you a good taste of this author's writing style as well as a taste of the world and its lore too. I'm very intrigued and I really want to read Curious Tides. I just haven't gotten to it yet, so that will be happening at some point. And then the first actual book I read in the month, the one I read and kicked off things with and loved, and I should have seen that coming because I really love this author, is Tessa Miyata is No Hero, which is by Julie Abid. This is the first book in her new middle grade series, and I absolutely loved it. Our main character Tessa is spending the summer in Japan with her grandparents and her sisters, but unlike her sisters, she's deemed a little too young to go into Tokyo and explore by herself or hang out with them. And she ends up also having to hang out with her neighbor, Jin, but on the day that she finally gets to go into the city with her grandfather and Jin, she and Jin end up breaking a priceless heirloom for her family, and they release a powerful samurai god that has evil plans for Tokyo. It's up to them to stop it. And I just had so much fun reading this book. It feels very much like an anime, and I'm not even mad about it. I love the incorporation of Japanese lore and mythology and the setting and even a little bit of history there. I also really enjoyed getting to know Tessa. She reminds me a lot of other heroines I've encountered in both middle grade and other fantasy books and in anime and manga. And I enjoyed that. I like the supernatural aspects of this story. I felt like it balanced really well between the emotional aspects of Tessa's experience, but also all the action and cool fighting lore scenes. Those were great. I was really rooting for Tessa from the start, and by the end of this book, I was brought to tears just because I loved Tessa so much, and I like seeing where her story ended up. Also, it helps that there were mentions of some anime that I really enjoy, personally. That's always fun for me to see in books. So yeah, definitely another winner from Julie Abin. I'm so excited for the next book in the series. The next book is also part of a series that I loved, and I also very much enjoyed it, and that is Foul Heart Huntsman, which is by Chloe Gong. This is the last book of the Secret Shanghai universe. It also concludes the Foul Lady Fortune duology. This centers around Rosalind, who is a character you meet very early on in These Violent Delights, and she gets her own duology. And she is determined to rescue her former partner Orion, to find a cure to his mother's invention, and also to prevent this very powerful chemical weapon from falling into the wrong hands. As you can imagine, because this is spies and sort of, warfare and assassins, there is a lot of shenanigans and secrets in this one, and there's a lot of people trying to cover their tracks and people trying to find that things out, and I just loved it. I am a sucker for Chloe's Secret Shanghai universe. I have loved it since I first picked up These Violent Delights, and I've only continued to further develop my love for it with every single book in that universe. I just love the characters in this world. I love the world itself and how it's structured and, both the historical and the fantastical elements to it. I love the action scenes. I love the banter. I love the quotes. It's such a good time. And this conclusion was satisfying on all fronts in a way, Our Violent Ends was also a very good conclusion, but this one just wraps up this universe so well. It makes me feel so satisfied at the ending of it. I had so many thoughts and feelings while I was reading this one. A lot of them were spoilery, but suffice to say, just getting to spend time in this world and with these characters, despite the very dire circumstances that they're in, definitely was a good time. So I'm glad I finally got to read it and that this is out, and I highly recommend the entire universe, and this book just ends it all very well. Alright, I also read Crown of Coral and Pearl, which is by Myra Rutherford. It is the first in a duology. This one is set in a world where tradition dictates that the crown princes of the kingdom of Elara are always set to marry the most beautiful maiden from an ocean-based village called Verenia. This year, everyone knows that it's going to be Zadie, but when she gets injured, her twin sister Nor is sent to Elara in her place and uncovers some strife and political struggles going on over there. And I was really pleasantly surprised by this book. I do think it starts off a bit slow. There's a lot of setup at the beginning. You kind of are really just stuck in that village with Zadie and Nor, and you're learning about the world, but only through what they know and what they've been told. It really kicks into gear once Nor actually leaves and goes to Alara with the Crown Prince. I think you find out more about the plotting that's going on in behind the scenes and the different parties that have things to gain and things to lose. And I thought like Mara's handling of that was really interesting. I honestly didn't expect the plot to go as far as it did in the first book, because now I just don't know how the second book is going to go, but I do intend to continue and complete the series, and I'm glad I picked it up on a whim. Next, I read Anatomy, a Love Story. This is historical fiction with a murder mystery, and it is about Hazel, who wants to be a surgeon, which is not pretty typical of females of her time. And then there is Jack, who is a resurrection man. The two end up entangled in a murder mystery when more and more people start disappearing off the streets, and they decide to investigate that. And I was also pleasantly surprised by how interesting I found this one. I like that Hazel is obviously very determined to do what she wants, even though it goes against everybody else's wishes in her life, and pretty much against what society would deem proper for a female. I enjoyed seeing them get swept up in this murder mystery. Like, I very rarely read mystery-centered books, but I like it when the plotline entangles me or ensnares me in the way that this one does. And I guess I also really enjoy it when it's a historical murder mystery. I digress. I don't actually... I feel like a lot of it didn't stay with me after the fact, but when I was reading it, I do recall being like, oh, this is entertaining, and I don't know where the next chapter is going to take us or where we're going to go next. So that's a mark in its favor, and I do think it was worth reading. Then I finished a series, and that is Chain of Thorns, which is the finale to the Last Hours trilogy by Cassandra Clare. Before I had even gone into this one, there had been a lot of like mixed opinions, generally leaning towards like they liked it okay, but they had a lot of stuff to say, or they didn't like it at all. I fall into the camp of I liked it. There are a lot of comments that I have about it, and I'll link to the blog where I talked about it more extensively, but I was pretty entertained. I thought it was good. There were aspects of it I didn't particularly love, but I did find it compelling enough to read, and I liked finding out what happened to this particular generation of Shadowhunter kids, just because I'm so invested in all of them, and you know, I love them. This is a big group of cast of characters where I actually love all of them. I will say that this book did surprise me in some respects in terms of the characters that I ended up loving while I was reading it. That was a total surprise to me. There were also characters that I found really frustrating in this one, which is not too surprising, but I was also like, very particularly bothered by them. Still, overall, solid book, solid conclusion. Definitely does not beat out Heavenly Fire as the best conclusion I think that Cassandra Clare has ever written, but I do think like it's a pretty solid piece of work in the Shadowhunter world. And yeah, it finishes off the story pretty well, and I just had a good time hanging out with the gang. The next book that I read was The Dawn of Yangchen, which is by F.C.E. This is another book in the Chronicles of the Avatar World series, and this obviously follows Avatar Yangchen, and she's navigating a political situation in the Earth Kingdom and ends up partnering with Kavik, a young man that she meets early on in the story. And the thing I find the most interesting about the Avatar books, of which there are really only 2 sets right now, there's one about Kyoshi and then there's this one about Yangchen, I do find it interesting to get the perspective of another Avatar. It's always sort of a culture shock when that happens, because the avatars they share a commonality in terms of their power and their role in the world, but their personalities and their histories and their upbringings are all totally different, and that informs who they are, the choices they make, and what they do. And it's always a culture shock. So I think that's what happened to me with Yangchen's. I was a little bit unused to her as a character, and it took me a while to really get into the groove of her story. I don't think I found it nearly as memorable or as relatable as I would say Aang's is, obviously, because, you know, that's a longer span of time and you saw it on screen, or even Kyoshi's. I think Yangchen for me is one of those things where like I appreciate the objective way that the plot is laid out, but it didn't necessarily end up becoming like a new personal favorite. I do still think I will finish it out though, just because I want to know how it ends, but I will say this one was just okay. Then for our family book club, I picked up The Authenticity Project. Don't remember the name of the author. It's Claire or something, I think. Basically, the plot of this one is that there is a solitary green notebook that ends up bringing together a group of people in unexpected friendship and love. And I like the concept of it more than I like the execution of it. which is not to say that the execution was bad, it just was like fine, if that makes sense. It would have been such a compelling story because I'm such a sucker for stories where we're focusing on characters and relationships, and the setup for this one sounds perfect for that, right? But I think it was just because I felt like I didn't love all the characters necessarily, nor did I like sort of their interactions. I feel like the author tried to do this, and for me personally just fell short of the mark, since I didn't end up really feeling personally invested in all these characters and what would happen to them. Like, objectively speaking, I could see like how their stories were weaving together and appreciate that, but like personally I wanted to feel more for them. I also don't like how it ends. Like, I don't know. I don't know how else it could have ended, but I also just don't like how it ends. Like, and that's a me thing. We're gonna move on to something else, which I enjoyed, and that is Stellarlune, which is the 9th installment of the Keeper of the Lost City series that Mackie and I have talked about many times on this channel. Sophie is back in this world, and she and her friends are forced to confront their ideas of power, of what's right and what's wrong, and what they need to do to get to what they want. And they also discover more about the truth about this world and the different parties in it. And I had a great time reading this book. I flew through it considering how long it is. And I think it's partly because I missed being in the Keeper of the Lost City's world, which is very whimsical and magical. And you're always finding out new things, like new magic or new possibilities, and they just make sense, and I enjoy that. I also just enjoy hanging out with Sophie and the gang and getting to encounter like old favorite characters. That is always a good time. Plus, this book marks the chapter where something pretty damn epic happens that I feel like I've been waiting for forever, and it finally happened. So, you know what? No complaints from me. This is not necessarily my favorite installment, nor do I think it's the strongest, but I do see how we're edging closer to a conclusion for the series, especially given how this one ends. Once again, Shannon Messenger leaving us with a cliffhanger, but you know, it is what it is, and I was glad to experience it. I also read Bookshops and Bonedust, which is by Travis Baldree, and that is actually a prequel novella about Viv, who is the star of Legends and Lattes. So Viv gets injured on a mission, and she's forced to convalesce in a small seaside town, and she finds herself getting ingratiated with the day-to-day lives of its inhabitants and working in the bookshop there. And I like that this one gives us a different perspective on Viv and sort of lets us see who she was prior to when we meet her in Legends and Lattes. I liked, again, that we had another sense of community. I liked that there was a more action-driven plot in this one, surprisingly, which I was not expecting. Obviously, I love that the aspect of this one, when it comes to like the cozy vibes, is a bookstore. Like, there's a bookstore and there's a bakery, and like, that's all I want, really. I thought it was charming and comforting and lovely to listen to. I don't think I necessarily loved it as much as Legends and Lattes, but it definitely was of the same caliber, and I'm glad that, you know, feeling that I wanted, which was comforting, cozy fantasy, still existed in that book. I then read Yours Truly, which is by Abby Jimenez, and this is probably my favorite Abby Jimenez book, tied with the Happy Ever After playlist. This is about Brianna and Jacob, who work at the same hospital. They end up making terrible, terrible first impressions on each other. Eventually, they give each other a second chance, end up corresponding through some fun little notes, and their friendship and subsequent relationship starts to blossom. But both of them have some history that, you know, might be an obstacle in them developing any romance, and it remains to be seen what happens next. And what I do appreciate about Abby Jimenez is her storytelling style. I feel like that's always worked really well for me with her romance books, because she does a great job giving us these individual characters who really pop off the page, and they feel like real people that you could know, and to really let us understand like their strengths, their weaknesses, but also the things that they struggle with, and how that would impede them from pursuing any sort of relationship. And I like that these things always feel realistic in terms of what people might go through and when, you know, trying to develop a relationship or fall in love and stuff like that. And yeah, I thought this was really good. I loved following Brianna and Jacob's story. I got really emotional for them because I was so invested in both of them as characters and them together. And you know, warm fuzzies, lots of feelings. That's all I can think of when I see this book. Like, I'm just thinking about how deeply I felt for these characters, how deeply I grieved for them and was happy for them. And you know what? For me, that's the mark of a good romance. So there you have it. I also read, while I was away on a trip, I actually read the entirety of Starling House. And this is about a main character named Opal, who is drawn to a mysterious house called Starling House. And right now, the only person who lives there is the brooding heir to the family, and she ends up becoming his housekeeper, or house caretaker. And it turns out that the house and the rumors that are spread that are connected to it are connected to the town's history. And Opal is probably the only person who can put all of that to bed. And I love the vibes of this one. There's like an eerie fairy tale whimsical gothic vibe, and I thought it worked really well for the story. I liked the narrative structure as well because it starts off where you have very basic knowledge of what's going on, and then you sort of get more perspective until finally you get the big revelation. I thought it was a good blend of like something real with something magical. I like that it had one foot on both sides. And I think like it's one of those books where I feel like you'll either love it or not. And for me personally, I enjoyed the vibes of it. I thought the way that everything plays out worked really well. Could not tear myself away from this book for very long, which is why I finished it so fast while I was in transit. So it was a good time. Actually, I hesitate to say it was a good time because there are some things in that book where I was like, this is really tragic and sad. So it's more like it was a book that I could not put down and it left an impression. And I guess that's the more important thing. All right, we're gonna come quickly to a section I'm going to call manga. Because I read some manga. So I did read the first 3 volumes of My Happy Marriage. This is based on a light novel by Akumi Agitogi. The art is by Rita Kosaka and the character design by Tsukiyo Tsukioka. When I tell you that this is my new obsession, it is my new obsession. I'm not even joking. I'm gonna link you to the blog. I loved this series and I still love it, and I'm so excited to watch the anime, and I'm so excited to watch the live action. Anyway, this is a Cinderella-inspired historical slow burn romance that has a slight paranormal element. It features Mio, who is the Cinderella character, and her family eventually gives her away to Kyoko Kudo, who is looking for a fiancé. He's rumored to be very cruel, very stoic, and very strict, so remains to be seen how it will work out for them. But I loved it. First of all, the art style, love it. Second of all, the storytelling, love it. I think it's great because it has the romance in it, but it also has some other things going on in it, which I'm curious to find out more about. The characters, excellent. Loved meeting Kyoka, loved meeting Mio, loved seeing their struggles together. Like I literally, I was reading this one and I squealed because there's just so... I just have a lot of feelings about things that happen in this book because... It's so good. Like, I don't know what to tell you. Like, I wish I had more words to explain how much I love this, but like, when you know, you know. And I know that I love this book, and it's basically my new obsession. And now I kind of want to reread it again, even though I only read it the one time. It was so good, you guys. It was so satisfying. It made me so happy. Like, if anything, my tell that I'm really enjoying something is if it gets me to scream at some point because of a panel or something that was said or, you know, anything like that. This one did it multiple times, and it was great. I also read the first volume of Blue Period, which is by Tsubasa Yamaguchi. It's got this cover. This is our main character, Yatora. He's perfect high school student. He gets good grades, but he doesn't really have a strong passion or direction for where his life is going to go. One day he stumbles into the art room and is completely moved by this painting that he sees there, and he decides he wants to pursue art, and it starts to change the course of the rest of his life. I like the first volume a lot because I love the commentary that art is moving and that it could change your life in that way. I liked seeing him try to pursue something creative and the struggles and the ups and downs that go with that, especially as someone who is a beginner at it, right? So I'm looking forward to reading the rest of this. I actually have most of the volumes out from the library for the next part of the series, so definitely looking forward to that as well. Had a good time reading this. Also really liked the art aspect of this. I thought it was really well done. And last but certainly not least, I read the entirety of Living Room Matsunaga-San by Keiko Iwashita in the month of September, and I really enjoyed it. So high school gal Miko, who is on this cover, moves into her uncle's boarding house because her parents have to go and take care of her grandmother, and she ends up learning how to take care of herself, how to get along with her housemates, and also falls in love. And I thought this was great. Another one where I was squealing, yelling, kind of emotional at times over this manga series. Like, it's a lot of fun. It's very slice of life, really. You just see Miko growing up and growing into herself over the course of the entirety of the series, which is 11 volumes, and that was fun. You see the ups and the downs of like her relationships with other people, the obstacles that come into her life, and also the romance that develops between her and one of the housemates. I personally had such a good time reading this. Like, I enjoyed it so much. Some volumes are stronger than others, and I also do think that there is some dramatic turns of events that occur towards the end of the series where I'm kind of like, okay, that was a little unnecessary, but you know, why not amp up the drama, right? So yeah, I'm glad I finally read it. I know my friend Rachel was dying for me to get to the series, and I'm glad I finally did. Okay, those are all the books that I read, books and manga that I read in the month of September. It was also a very good reading month, and I'm glad to be able to report that. If you have read any of these, definitely let me know what you think in the comments. If you haven't, let me know which one you're excited to check out, and I will see you guys in the new video soon. Bye!